It was unthinkable. Donna Adelson, the matriarch of the Adelson clan, throwing her beloved daughter under the bus. And yet it happened, and not just once, 7 times. For 11 years and multiple trials, Wendi Adelson has danced just out of reach in the Dan Markel murder case. Prosecutors suspected her, social media slammed her, but nothing ever seemed to come of it. She testified against Katie Medbanawa, accused of hiring the hitmen. Wendi wasn't arrested. Wendi testified against her own brother, Charlie, cool as a cucumber, yet she was not arrested. But everything changed in the Donna Adelson trial when Wendi testified against her own mother. This time, Wendi's own mother came for her. In this video, we are going to cover 7 times when Donna threw Wendi under the bus. By the time of Donna's trial, Wendi already had testified multiple times at the trials of Sigfredo Garcia, Katie Medbanawa, and Charlie. And each time, the state's questioning was very harsh. Nobody walked out of that Tallahassee courtroom thinking that the state thought Wendi was innocent. It was 100% clear that the state believes Wendi was in some way involved in hiring hitmen to murder her ex, FSU law professor Dan Markel. In the past, the state has even called Wendi a co-conspirator. Yet Wendi survived. As 4 other people pled guilty or were convicted by juries, she remained outside prison with no pending charges. When she testified against her brother, he went to prison for life while she walked away a free woman. Until finally, we come to the trial of Wendi's own mother, Donna Adelson. But this time was different. Wendi showed up just like before, and just like before, she testified with use and derivative use immunity, meaning that the state cannot use her own words, her testimony against her. And still, the state has not arrested her and has not charged her. Donna's defense team argued that the jury should blame someone else, even Donna's beloved daughter, Wendi. In opening arguments, Donna's defense repeatedly separated Donna from the rest of the family. And during the trial, they were not holding back. They threw Donna's children under the bus, and that applied to both Wendi and Charlie. That was one thing when it came to Charlie, because Charlie has already been convicted. Even he acknowledges that his chances on appeal are very slim. So with near certainty, he will be spending the rest of his life in prison. So blaming Charlie is not likely to harm him in any way. It's not going to change anything. But throwing Wendi under the bus is quite a different matter because Wendi has not been convicted. She hasn't even been charged yet. It's especially shocking given how devoted Donna has been to Wendi. In fact, the prosecution theme has been that Donna was so involved with her kids and especially Wendi that she would do anything for them, even murder. Given how devoted Donna was, it was jaw-dropping when Donna hung Wendi out to dry at trial. But let's take a look at 7 times when Donna did the unthinkable at trial. Number 1, Luis Rivera was one of the 2 hitmen who drove to North Florida twice to scope out Dan Markel and kill him. Rivera has since taken a plea deal, and he was there to testify against Donna at trial. To try to prove Donna's innocence, that she was not guilty, Donna's lawyers took Luis Rivera's deposition before trial got started. That means they sat down with him and asked questions before trial. It was all taken down by a court reporter. And their goal was to prove that Donna wasn't guilty. They showed Rivera a diagram, and the diagram shows all the potential players, including Wendi, Donna, Donna's husband, Harvey, Wendi's father, Charlie, everybody. The testimony came out well for Donna, but Wendi was collateral damage. At trial, Donna's lawyer explained she put the diagram in front of Luis Rivera and asked him to number the people who had been involved. Here's how Donna's lawyer explained what happened at trial.
But in any event, Luis Rivera then puts this number 2 next to Sigfredo Garcia because he's the one who actually killed Danny Markel. Number 3 next to himself because he's the one who got the gun and drove the car to kill Danny Markel and then away from the scene. This is the man that he says they killed. Who else on this document do you recognize? On this exhibit? Who else? Who else was involved in this? Well, all the players that the state claims are involved are pictured on this document, and he says, Wendi Adelson, she's the lady who wanted to get her kids back. This is why we were committing the crime. Wendi Adelson. And doctor, the dentist, he called him, which is Charlie Adelson, who he identified, was the one with Katie. This one and this one are the reasons that they're coming to Tallahassee to kill Dan Markel. And I said, well, what about Donna Adelson or Harvey Adelson? No, they weren't involved. I said, would you put an X next to them if they weren't involved? And he did. Donna Adelson's name never came up, but Luis Rivera is telling the truth according to the state. That's who you're supposed to believe, and he says my client is not involved.
Luis Rivera has testified before, but this was the first trial where he's done that. Up until now, he had simply said they were working for a lady who wanted to keep her kids. Number two, in case anyone harbored any doubt that Donna was blaming Wendi, her lawyers went straight for the jugular. They named Wendi specifically in closing argument, and they said they could see how a jury could find her guilty.
You have been sitting here hearing testimony for almost 2 weeks, and there's not a single piece of evidence that connects my client to that murder. Charlie Adelson? Yep. Potentially Wendi Adelson? She's the one who said she hated him. She's the one fighting with him in court. Donna Adelson? Nothing. Not a single piece of evidence. You have to find her not guilty because they have failed to do their job on all 3 counts. They cannot prove she had him killed. At the time that he was killed, she had paid anybody or asked anybody to do it.
Donna's lawyers could have simply said, maybe you think Wendi did it, but they did not stop there. Donna's lawyers instead gave the jury a reason to believe Wendi did it because Wendi said she hated Dan Markel. That's straight up putting Wendi into the case without an absolute need to do it. It's giving Donna an out at the expense of Wendi. Of course, what Wendi's lawyers say isn't evidence. It cannot be used against Wendi if she is ever charged. But the fact that Donna's lawyers drew Wendi in without an actual need to do so speaks volumes about just how deep the divisions in the Adelson family have become. Number 3, Donna's lawyers even went in for straight up character assassination of Wendi. And it all had to do with the relocation fight. Now, remember that the prosecution theory of the case was that Donna Adelson desperately wanted her grandkids nearby. The kids were located in North Florida, and she wanted them to move to the Miami area where she lives. Up until this trial, we had understood Wendi wanted the same thing. At Charlie's trial, the prosecution used a novel Wendi had written. The novel was about a woman who wanted to get out of a small backwater Florida town and move to a big city. The prosecution suggested that this was really just a thinly veiled reference to Wendi wanting to get out of Tallahassee and move elsewhere because she hated Tallahassee. But at Donna's trial, we heard surprise testimony that Wendi had actually agreed at a hearing that she would stay in Tallahassee with her kids. Donna and Harvey, her mom and dad, were in the hallway during this hearing. They were not allowed to go into the hearing where she made this agreement. And then she never told them what she had done. She let them believe that she wanted to get out of Tallahassee as much as they wanted her to, but that her hands were just tied by the court ruling. She did not tell them that the court had ruled that way because she agreed to it. The defense treated this with a good deal of outrage. Sure, Donna wrote those wild emails they suggested, like the one about converting the kids from Judaism to Christianity just to drive their father nuts, or the one about dressing the kids up like Nazi soldiers to offend their father. But now it turned out that all the time Donna wrote those emails, She was under the misimpression that Wendi desperately wanted out of Tallahassee. The only reason Donna continued to push for relocation and wrote all those controversial emails was because she thought Wendi wanted out, and Wendi never bothered to tell her the truth.
Now, have Charlie Adelson and Wendi Adelson been honest with their mother? The evidence says no, they haven't been. Because the whole time Wendi Adelson is telling her mother, she's telling her mother that relocation is what she wants. She's the one who starts that. She's the one who asks her lawyer about it. The whole time in the spring leading up to this hearing, Wendi Adelson admitted in her testimony she's sending these messages to her life coach and telling her life coach, you know, I think I want to stay in Tallahassee. But she didn't bother to tell her mother that. Her mother still thinks she's trying to get relocation. She does it in April. And then she writes to her again in May. I think I'm going to give up relocation. I can stay in Tallahassee. The kids will be close to their boys. There won't be any plane rides. And I like my job. It gives me all this flexibility. I'm going to stay. But she still doesn't tell her mother. She has her mother believing we got to fight for this relocation. She testified. Well, why did your mother get so upset? Well, she's venting to her mother about what she claims Danny Markel is doing, and she's venting to her mother about what she wants to accomplish, only she's not being honest with her. On the backside, she's making other plans. It'd have been nice for my client, Donna Adelson, to know that, because these emails that have been submitted here, which are proof that she wanted to have Danny Markel killed, would not have been written. And when she goes to her hearing on the relocation in June of 2013, she has her mother stay outside. Her mother can't hear what's going on in the hearing. She admitted she had several witnesses to call beyond the two that got on the stand. And then after the judge made the comment, she gave up. She could have continued with the hearing and put her witnesses on. The judge could have ruled against her, and then maybe she has an appellate issue. She gave up because she didn't want it anymore, but she didn't tell her mother that. When she told her mother, well, this is how the judges ruled, the mother understood that through the court system it was done, but not with her daughter, Wendi. Because you can continue to negotiate all the way through a final judgment. And that's what those emails say. They do suggest some crazy stuff. They do. But she puts in there, we're trying to negotiate. We're trying to negotiate. Get this, you can still work on this. She doesn't know when she's writing those crazy emails that there's no reason to write them because her daughter agreed. You know, you can have a dismissal on an issue. You can have a denial on an issue. She agreed to it with prejudice, which means it is over. She already made an agreement. She's not going to seek relocation anymore. So my client is hanging out there trying to support her daughter, and now she's sitting in a court of law charged with murder because of what she wrote in emails. Because the truth is, you are here to judge my client based on her conduct leading up to and to the time of death of Danny Markel.
Of course, if Wendi will lie to her own mother, that seriously undermines her credibility. If her mother can't trust her, how can anyone? And again, there was no reason to make this argument. It doesn't help Donna. If anything, it suggests that Donna might have hired hitmen by mistake, thinking Wendi wanted it. But the fact that Donna was wrong, that Wendi wanted it, doesn't do anything to help Donna. It doesn't prove Donna's not guilty. If Donna thought Wendi wanted out, then she had a motive to kill Dan Markel. Proving Wendi lied to give her that motive doesn't help Donna. It just means that Donna's motive was senseless, not that she didn't have one at all. So it hurts Wendi without helping Donna in any way. Number 4, Donna blamed Wendi for issuing a birthday evite with Wendi's boys listed as Adelson, even before their dad, Dan Markel, had been killed. One of the hot button issues in the case has been the way the Adelson clan abruptly pulled up the drawbridge to the grandkids after Dan died. The Markels went years without seeing the boys. Wendi says it was because they talked about putting the grandkids in foster care. The Markels say that's a red herring. They were discussing putting the boys in a Jewish home as a temporary measure, only to be done if Wendi was arrested and only while they traveled from their home in Canada to pick up the boys. But the prosecution also argued that the Adelsons did more than just raise the drawbridge. They burned it by changing the boy's last name from Markel to Adelson and effectively eradicating Dan Markel from the boys' lives. The prosecution said that wasn't an accident and it wasn't a last-minute decision. In fact, when Wendi and the boys were invited to Harvey's 70th birthday party, the invitation addressed them as Adelson, not Markel. This was before Wendi changed the boys' names to Adelson. In fact, it was while their father was still alive, before he was killed. The invitation went out under Donna's name, but at trial, Donna's team argued that it was Wendi who had set the invitation up for Donna because Donna didn't know how to use Evite.
Their witness that they called, Wendi Adelson, sat up there and said, what did she say? She probably did it because her mom doesn't know how. And then their other witness, Chris Corbett, Sergeant Corbett, who does all the media and cell phone tower stuff, he sat up there and he said it was clear to him from his research and investigation that my client, Donna Adelson, didn't have a clue how to work that. But she's responsible for sending out an Evite that Wendi says she did, where the names come up with guess who are going to be there that are Wendi Adelson, because she kept that name, and her two sons. So it's Wendi, the name of her two sons, and then Adelson at the end. If that's how it appears, Wendi did it, not my client.
It wasn't Donna who addressed the boys as Adelson. It was Wendi, which raises a number of questions. Why would Wendi do that with Dan Markel still alive? Did Wendi know what was coming? Was she preparing for the moment when Dan Markel would be out of the way and she would be able to take full custody, move those boys to South Florida, and change their name to Adelson? And it was Donna's legal team that raised those questions. Number 5, Donna's team argued that Wendi was intentionally interfering with Dan Markel's custody of his own children. Donna's team spent a great deal of time trying to position Donna on Dan Markel's side. Donna didn't interfere with Dan's custody, they said. It was Wendi who did that. Here's what Donna's lawyer argued in closing.
And this pleading goes on and on about, he says Wendi's refusing to facilitate video teleconferencing with the 3- and 4-year-old, that she's failing to regularly facilitate telephone contact with the children, that she routinely violates the right of first refusal, resulting in the children missing days from preschool, that she violates her duty to inform that's in the MSA. She fails to follow clinical recommendations. She violates by refusing to communicate with Mr. Markel. She persists in inhibitory parental gatekeeping, refused to provide access to have both children on one of the child's birthdays. The only single complaint he makes about my client is she called him stupid, according to a 3- and 4-year-old. What is the evidence that supports 2 things? 1, that my client did not know it had been filed, and 2, that Danny Markel was not trying to keep my client from having unsupervised contact with him. Well, the proof is, from Wendi's testimony, that he continued himself, because during the course of the marriage and separation and divorce, my client, Mrs. Adelson, didn't just continue to assist Wendi when Wendi needed help with the kids. She continued to assist Danny. And in fact, that motion was filed on March the 26th, and the testimony was, for almost 2 weeks in April, my client watched the boys while both parents were out of town. And my client facilitated the Skype with the grandsons for Mr. Markel. Now, if he's really worried about her having unsupervised contact, is he going to leave him with her for almost 2 weeks in April? And he does it again and again.
Donna Adelson's lawyers are drawing a stark contrast between Wendi and Donna, a contrast that makes Wendi look very bad. Wendi was interfering with custody, refusing to let Dan talk to the kids, refusing to let him even have them when she was going out and couldn't be with them herself. Donna, on the other hand, they're saying, was getting along great with Dan Markel. And notice how Donna's team is going out of their way to describe all the things that Wendi did to undermine Dan Markel's custody. They could have said both Wendi and Donna were doing all they could. Wendi allowed phone calls. Donna babysat extra if Dan needed it. And after all, Dan Markel wasn't there to contradict it because he has been killed. But that's not all that Donna's team said. Instead, they talked about how many things she was doing to interfere with Dan Markel's custody. Donna and Dan got along great. Wendi and Dan, a completely different matter. Donna was team Markel. Wendi was very much team anti-Markel. Number 6, in closing arguments, Donna's lawyers flat out suggested to the jury that they might think Wendi is guilty. It was an argument that nobody had to make. They could have argued that Donna was not guilty without suggesting that Wendi was guilty, but that's not the way they rolled at trial. Here's what they said in closing argument.
Charlie Adelson is not on trial. You may be sitting in that jury room thinking, well, Charlie did it, and it sure looks like Wendi did it. That doesn't have an ounce to do with Donna Adelson doing a thing. Not a single thing.
Number 7, and probably the most shocking example of all, was the last question that Donna's team put to Wendi on cross-examination. Wendi was called by the state to testify against her mother. She did not blame her mother or say specifically that her mother killed Dan Markel, but she did authenticate and verify things like those crazy emails from Donna. She talked about some of the damning facts. On cross-examination, Donna's lawyer, Jackie Fulford, confronted Wendi with her own words that anyone in the family who was responsible for Dan's death should be held accountable. And Fulford asked bluntly if that included Wendi herself. Wendi answered yes, effectively letting Donna's defense highlight Wendi as a potential instigator of Dan Markel's murder. Was it payback for Wendi's interview, the one where she volunteered that her parents were very angry toward Dan Markel?
You know, my parents are, very angry towards him. But even when they're around my kids, they would never say a bad word about my kid's father. They're really, really careful about that. They just like him, but they know he's the father of my kids. They would never.
And in that same interview, which happened within hours of the shooting of Dan Markel, Wendi called her mom and dad and asked them to come up and be with her. And when she got off the phone, Wendi said,
My mom handled that pretty well. Could you hear her?
Yeah. I think, because you're a mama, but moms always go in that natural instinct to kind of protect and help and...
Yeah.
We may never know why Donna's team was so aggressive against Wendi, but one thing for sure, it showed the chinks that are appearing on the Team Adelson side, and it made it all the more likely that one day the state may decide to charge Wendi Adelson.